I had learned early in my career that corporate offices have their own weather. Some days were calm, emails flowing, meetings running on time, coffee warm but not rushed. Other days felt like storms brewing behind glass walls and polished desks, where one wrong step could drown you. That morning felt like the second kind. The building itself was one of those modern Manhattan towers, steel, glass, and quiet confidence. The kind of place where the lobby smelled faintly of espresso and expensive cologne, and the security guards nodded at you like they knew you belonged, as long as you didn't give them a reason to think otherwise. I had been working at Harrington Dynamics for just under 3 years. Not glamorous years. Not the kind people brag about on LinkedIn, but real ones: late nights, weekend decks, endless revisions on presentations no one remembered approving. I was a senior analyst on paper, but in reality, I was the glue guy, the one who filled gaps, smoothed disasters, and made other people look brilliant in boardrooms. They barely prepared for Dot, and that morning mattered more than any other day I'd had at the company. I checked my watch as the elevator climbed dates. A.M. The $800 million investor was scheduled for 9:30. His name was Daniel Whitmore. In venture capital circles, he wasn't just respected, he was feared in a polite, British way. Former banker, turned private equity, turned kingmaker. When Whitmore invested, companies didn't just get funding. They got credibility, media attention, a future. And today, he was here to decide whether Harrington Dynamics would get the biggest capital injection in its history. I was the one who'd prepared the numbers, not the CEO, not the executive team. Me. For 6 weeks, I had lived inside spreadsheets, forecast models, market penetration scenarios, risk buffers. I'd slept with my laptop open and woken up correcting assumptions. The CEO, Richard Harrington, had glanced at my work twice and said, "Looks solid. Walk me through it before the meeting." Which meant one thing: if this deal went through, my fingerprints would be everywhere. If it didn't, no one would remember my name. I stepped off the elevator and headed toward the cafe area just outside. The executive floor? I needed coffee strawn black, no sugar. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing ahead to the meeting. That's when I felt someone brush past me. Hard. I turned instinctively, and my elbow clipped the edge of my cup. The world slowed in, the way it only does right before something goes wrong. Coffee arced through the air and landed squarely on a tailored navy blue suit. Silence followed, the kind that feels heavier than shouting. I froze. Then I heard it. What the hell? I looked up. The man standing in front of me was young. Late 20s, maybe. Perfect hair. Expensive watch. The kind of confidence that comes not from achievement, but inheritance. I recognized him instantly. Ethan Harrington, the CEO's son. It wasn't officially on the org chart, but everyone knew he worked here. A title created just for him. Director of Strategic Initiatives, whatever that meant this month. Mostly it meant he wandered around acting like the building belonged to him. Coffee dripped from his jacket. Slowly, deliberately. His eyes locked onto mine. "Are you blind?" he snapped. I'm so sorry, I said immediately, already reaching for napkins. That was completely my fault. "Mimi, do you know how much this suit costs?" He cut in. "I'll pay for the cleaning," I said. "Or replacement. Whatever you," he laughed. Not amused, offended. Then his voice rose. "Do you know who my father is?" Heads turned. People slowed their steps. A few assistants pretended to check their phones while very clearly listening. I felt heat creep up my neck. "Yes," I said calmly. "I do, and I'm really sorry. It was an accident." "You're clumsy," he said, and careless. "I understand you're upset," I replied, keeping my tone even. "But I have a meeting in." He stepped closer. "You work here because my father allows it," he said, "and because people like you are replaceable." The cafe area had gone completely quiet now. Then he shouted, "You're fired." The word echoed. A few people gasped softly. I stared at him, stunned. "Excuse me?" I said. "You heard me." He barked. "You're done. Clean out your desk." I took a breath. "With all due respect," I said carefully, "you're not my manager. And today of all days—" "Oh, today," he interrupted. "Especially today. You think I care what you're working on?" He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to sound dangerous. "I don't like you. And now you've embarrassed me. That's enough." There it was. Power without responsibility. I looked around. No one stepped in. No one said a word. HR wasn't nearby. Security stayed at a distance. And Ethan Harrington stood there, waiting for me to beg. I didn't. I straightened my posture. "If that's your decision," I said quietly, "I'll head out." His lips curled into a satisfied smile. "Good," he said. "You should have watched where you were going." I turned away. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady as I walked toward the elevators. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that I should fight it. Call HR, call my manager, demand protocol. Another thought cut through, louder than all the rest. The meeting. I checked my watch again at 26 a.m. Whitmore would arrive early. He always did, and he always waited in the lobby. I stepped into the elevator. the door sliding shut behind me. SIT descended. My phone buzzed. A message from my manager. Where are you? Need to review slide 14 before Whitmore arrives? I stared at the screen, then typed back. On my way? The elevator opened into the lobby. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. The marble floors gleamed. The receptionist smiled politely as I walked past, and there he was. Daniel Whitmore stood near the seating area, scrolling through his phone, gray hair, tailoredcoat.com presence. The kind of man who looked like he never rushed because the world waited for him. He looked up, then smiled. Ready for our meeting? He asked. I stopped. Just a few feet away I exhaled. I was. I said, but I should tell you something. He raised an eyebrow. I've just been fired. There was a pause. Then Whitmore chuckled softly. Ah, he said. Oh, Rania, that must be a record. I didn't smile. He pulled out his phone. Who is it? He asked casually. This gentleman. He turned the screen toward me. A photo filled the display. Ethan Harrington. My stomach dropped. That's him, I said. Whitmore nodded slowly. Interesting, he murmured. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Well then, he said, straightening his coat. Let's sit. And as we took our seats in the lobby, two men no longer employed by Harrington Dynamics, I realized something profound. The coffee spill wasn't the mistake. It was the spark. The lobby hummed with quiet sophistication, marble floors reflecting the morning light, but my focus was entirely on Daniel Whitmore. I couldn't shake the surreal sense of irony. Just 20 minutes ago, I had been humiliated by the CEO's son, and now I was sitting across from the man who could change the fate of Harrington Dynamics in a single phone call. Whitmore sipped his coffee calmly, his movements deliberate, the kind that suggests decades of experience in reading people. He didn't flinch at the news I had just dropped that I'd been fired. He didn't ask why. Instead, he leaned back and studied me, like a chess player evaluating a board before the first move. So, he said finally, his voice smooth, almost teasing, you're telling me the person responsible for preparing this entire pitch is no longer employed by the company? I nodded. That's correct. Ethan Harrington, CEO's son. He decided my life wasn't worth continuing here, and he didn't even wait for the meeting. Whitmore's lips curled into the faintest smile. Bold move. By him? Or foolish, perhaps? Tell me, what makes you so confident he didn't realize what he was doing? I've seen him, I replied carefully. He's reckless, arrogant, his father gives him everything, but he has no idea how business actually works. And today, is proven that. Whitmore leaned forward. His hands, massive and decisive, rested on the polished marble table. You've got my attention. Walk me through the presentation. I pulled out my laptop. Whitmore's eyes scanned the numbers before I even spoke, absorbing them like a hawk, assessing prey. We had 6 weeks of data, projections, charts, and carefully crafted strategies. This wasn't just a pitch. This was the culmination of sleepless nights, revisions, and every ounce of my corporate skill. I began walking him through the key slides. Market growth analysis, how Harrington Dynamics could capture an additional 12% market share over the next 2 years. Revenue projections, conservative estimates showing a 40% increase if strategic initiatives were properly implemented. Investment allocation, highlighting areas where capital injection could accelerate growth. With each slide, Whitmore's nods became more pronounced. He wasn't impressed by the fancy graphics. He was assessing me, the strategist, the thinker, the person who could execute these numbers if given the chance. And the risk factors? He asked, his tone mild but probing. I leaned in slightly. The biggest risk isn't the market. It isn't competition. It's leadership. The wrong decisions at the top could derail everything. I didn't name Ethan, but I didn't have to. Whitmore already knew the type of CEO's son I meant. Asterisk, he chuckled. Ah, the invisible hand of nepotism. Always fascinating. Please, continue. By the time we had gone through the first 30 slides, it was clear. Whitmore was intrigued. More than intrigued, he was thinking. And when Whitmore's thinking, he invests. Not much I knew from my research. He finally closed the laptop and leaned back. Interesting? Very interesting. I have a few questions before we finalize anything. Those questions were sharp, precise, not the kind designed to trip someone up, the kind that revealed intelligence, depth, and understanding. He asked about projected ROI in changing market conditions, the reliability of our data sources, and the strategies for rapid scaling. I answered all of them, my nerves steady, my mind razor-sharp. As we spoke, I realized the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about proving Harrington Dynamics could thrive, even without Ethan's interference, without the toxic leadership that had cost me my job. Then Whitmore leaned forward and tapped the table. Here's what I'm thinking. I want you to lead this deal. Not as an employee of Harrington Dynamics, though. That would be preferable. But independently, if we do this, you will run point. You will execute. You will report directly to me. No intermediaries, no nepotism, I paused. The offer was surreal. My mind raced. This was every corporate analyst's dream: autonomy, authority, and a chance to shine without political chains. But a voice in the back of my mind reminded me I'm officially fired. Harrington's son still thinks he has power over me. That arrogance won't go unanswered. I accept, I said, letting the words leave my mouth carefully. I'll handle it. Whitmore smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. Good, that's what I like to hear. But there's a catch. I raised an eyebrow, of course. The catch, he said, is that this has to go unnoticed by Harrington's board until the deal is sealed. Ethan Harrington must believe he still has control. Otherwise, complications arise. I nodded. That was fine. Subtlety has always been my strongest weapon. I could operate behind the scenes, gather leverage, and execute without drawing attention. Whitmore handed me a business card. Meet me here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I want to review the final numbers before I commit the funds. And don't worry about Harrington dynamics, internal politics. I enjoy watching the powerful get their comeuppance. I smirked. I appreciate the confidence. As I left the lobby, the morning sunlight felt different, empowering, dangerous, exciting. I walked past the elevators, my mind already spinning with strategy. The first step was clear: claim my power and make Harrington Dynamics pay for under me. Back at my apartment, I spread out my laptop, printed spreadsheets, and notes. I needed a plan. Ethan Harrington had humiliated me publicly, and while I could easily retaliate in small ways, I realized something critical. The ultimate revenge wasn't personal. It was professional. Every decision, every move, had to be calculated. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposing incompetence and claiming what was rightfully mine. Step 1. Identify weaknesses in the company. Step 2. Gather allies outside the Harrington sphere. Whitmore was already Step 2 in motion. Step 3. Execute flawlessly, ensuring Ethan Harrington looks foolish without knowing the origin of his downfall. I worked late into the night, planning every detail. The world outside blurred. Manhattan streets, honking cars, neon lights, it all faded. There was only me, Whitmore, and a strategy that could make or break everything. And somewhere in the back of my mind I could still hear Ethan's voice screaming, "Do you know who my father is?" Funny, I thought. I didn't need to know anymore. I had my own power now, and soon he would learn exactly who I was. The next morning, I arrived at Harrington Dynamics as usual. Well, usual was a stretch. Technically, I was no longer employed. But the lobby, with its polished marble and sterile lighting, didn't recognize job titles, it only recognized presence. And I had presence. I dressed carefully, every detail intentional. A crisp, navy blazer, tailored slacks, shoes polished, to a mere sheen. Not to impress Ethan Harrington, he'd never recognized style as competence, but to signal confidence to anyone who might cross my path. Confidence was contagious, and it was my first weapon, the first challenge. Get into the building without alerting HR. Security guards were cautious, polite, professional. I flashed a confident smile, claimed I was meeting with a key investor, Daniel Whitmore, and they waved me through. A small victory, but important. If I faltered here, everything would unravel before the game began. As I stepped onto the executive floor, my mind raced. Ethan Harrington had no idea that the person he humiliated yesterday was now walking back into his domain with leverage he couldn't even imagine. I moved quickly to the conference room where I'd scheduled a with Whitmore. He was already there, reviewing slides and projections on his laptop, a cup of strong black coffee in hand. He looked calm. Men like him never hurried. They simply moved in a way that made others feel they were late. "Good morning," I said. Whitmore glanced up, then smiled. "Morning. Ready to finalize your strategy?" "I've made adjustments," I said. "Based on your feedback yesterday, optimized projections, stronger risk analysis, and a few contingency strategies. You'll want to see." He raised an eyebrow. "I like efficiency. Let's see them." For the next 2 hours, we went through every number, scenario, and potential problem. I explained each adjustment, reasoning, and implication with precision. Whitmore asked tough questions, some designed to test my knowledge, others to assess my decision-making under pressure. I answered all of them. By the time we finished, he leaned back and nodded. "Well done. You've thought of everything. This is beyond what Harrington Dynamics is capable of." I'll be honest, I didn't trust the internal team to handle this properly. I nodded subtly. The praise was appreciated but expected. The real victory was elsewhere. Ethan Harrington, the arrogant son of the CEO, had no idea his empire was about to be shaken from the inside. Step 1. Planting the seeds. Whitmore and I agreed on the plan. Use my insider knowledge to prepare Harrington Dynamics for a strategic acquisition proposal. Subtly highlight gaps, inefficiencies, and poor leadership without making Ethan suspicious. Position Whitmore as the key investor whose funding depended on the company correcting course. Effectively, I was going to turn Harrington Dynamics against itself. And the first domino was Ethan. I spent the morning compiling reports, drafting emails, and setting up meetings. My strategy was simple: leverage facts, not emotions. Ethan's arrogance would handle the rest. By noon, I had prepared an anonymous report highlighting several critical failures in Harrington Dynamics management. Nothing false, every number, every observation, every misstep was accurate. Missed deadlines, overestimated revenue projections, poor client retention strategies, key staff dissatisfaction. It was damning, but subtle. It read like a concerned employee report, not a vendetta. I emailed it to the board of directors under an anonymous address I had set up the night before. Then, I waited. Ethan's first reaction around 2 p.m. The first ripple came. I wasn't in the office, Whitmore preferred. I operate from a secure location, but I had access to email alerts. Ethan Harrington erupted. The email hit him like a storm. His assistant whispered frantically to him, pointing at the screen. I could almost hear his voice screaming across the office. "What is this? Who sent this?" The board didn't respond immediately. They were cautious, calculating, but whispers spread. Emails circulated. Key executives called meetings. And through it all, Ethan had no idea I was the architect of his first taste of chaos. I smiled quietly in my temporary remote office. The game had begun. Strategic moves the next day. I returned to Harrington Dynamics under the guise of an independent consultant for Whitmore. Security barely blinked. The receptionist smiled politely, thinking I was there for a routine meeting. I spent the morning reviewing internal communications, gathering more insights. Ethan, of course, was desperate. He called meetings, demanded explanations, tried to track the source of the report. He didn't suspect me. Why would he? I had been the one he publicly humiliated. Logic says I wouldn't have access, but I did. And every piece of information I collected now gave me leverage. By mid-afternoon, I had compiled a new report. An executive performance assessment, again, anonymous. This one highlighted poor decisions by Ethan, specifically decisions that were impacting company profitability, client satisfaction, and staff morale. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't lie. Every misstep was documented with dates, emails, and evidence. By the time the board reviewed it, they were concerned. Seriously concerned. And the person they were most concerned about? Ethan Harrington. The first domino falls 2 days later. The board requested an emergency meeting. Ethan entered the room confident, thinking he was untouchable. But the room's atmosphere had shifted. The subtle undercurrent of doubt and concern ran like a silent river. Numbers had been leaked. Decisions were questioned. Senior executives who had once nodded at Ethan now glanced at each other uneasily. And the board, they were asking questions Ethan couldn't answer. I watched from my remote setup, communicating with Whitmore via secure messages. Every hesitation, every stumble Ethan made, reinforced the truth. Power without competence is fragile. By the end of the meeting, Ethan left, looking defeated. Not publicly humiliated yet, but internally shaken. The board didn't know who was behind it. Whitmore didn't reveal me. Then I smiled quietly, knowing the first domino had fallen. The morning air in Manhattan was crisp, but the tension inside Harrington Dynamics offices was hotter than the July sun. I arrived early, carrying my laptop in a calm demeanor. Today wasn't just another day, was the day the final pieces of the puzzle would fall into place. Ethan Harrington still had no idea. I was orchestrating the storm that had begun to shake his authority. He had survived the first domino, but that was only the beginning. I made my way past the lobby, past the elevators, past the polite nods of the reception staff who had no idea that the man they smiled at was no longer an employee. He was the lever that would bring the CEO's son to his knees. The boardroom ambush. The boardroom was large, glass-walled, and intimidating, perfect for showing dominance, or in Ethan's case, exposing weakness. I arrived early and set up in a corner with my laptop. Whitmore would be joining remotely, but I had a surprise prepared, a presentation that combined my insider knowledge with compelling, undeniable data. By 9 a.m. Ethan strutted in like a king entering his throne room. Confidence radiated from him, but it was starting to feel brittle. I didn't rise. I didn't acknowledge him. I just connected my laptop to the projector and opened the first slide. The board, intrigued, leaned forward. This wasn't a usual internal presentation. It had precision, clarity, and evidence of mismanagement. Each chart, each number, each note subtly pointed to Ethan's mistakes. "Good morning," I said, voice calm, professional. "I've compiled a comprehensive assessment of our operational efficiency, market performance, and leadership impacts on profitability. The goal is simple: prepare Harrington Dynamics for sustainable growth while securing strategic investor confidence." Ethan's face tightened. He frowned, but no one dared to say anything yet. The board's attention was entirely on the slides. Exposing the weakness, I went slide by slide. Every decision Ethan had made in the last 6 months was on display. Missed deadlines, misallocated resources, lost clients, it's all carefully documented, and, of course, my anonymous reports had been seeded earlier. So the board already had doubts in their minds. I spoke calmly, clearly, professionally, letting the facts do the talking. And then, the final slide. A side-by-side comparison of what success could look like under competent management versus current projections under existing leadership. The numbers were staggering. Profit margins could double, market share could expand by 15%, client retention could stabilize, and all of it was within reach. If Ethan's influence were removed from decision-making, whispers filled the room. The board members exchanged glances. The CEO's son, normally untouchable, could feel the walls closing in. One senior executive finally spoke. "Ethan, how do you respond to this?" Ethan stammered, caught off guard. These are not accurate. Some of these numbers are misleading." I cut in smoothly. "All numbers are verified. I've included original emails, contracts, and financial reports. Everything is backed by data." Silence. Even Ethan's assistant looked embarrassed. The room was tense, electric with anticipation. Whitmore steps in, then the video conference beeped. Daniel Whitmore appeared on the largescreen.com, authoritative and completely in control. "Good morning, everyone," he said smoothly. "I've reviewed the reports, and I must say, I'm impressed by the thoroughness and clarity. This is exactly the kind of insight I need before committing $800 million in funding." All eyes turned to me. I nodded subtly. Whitmore continued. "However, it's clear that Harrington Dynamics has some internal leadership challenges. My investment depends not just on market potential, but on execution capability. And currently, I have concerns about executive oversight." Ethan's face turned red. The board's eyes hardened. He had no idea Whitmore and I were aligned. No idea that he had lost control of the narrative. "Let me be clear," Whitmore added, "if these challenges aren't addressed, I cannot move forward. But if competent management is ensured, the company has an incredible opportunity." The board began murmuring in agreement. Some members nodded toward me, silently acknowledging my role. Ethan had no idea that the person he humiliated yesterday was now controlling the fate of his empire. The first blow, Ethan tried to defend himself. I can handle this. These issues aren't. It's just Whitmore. Cut him off sharply. "Ethan, data doesn't lie. Decisions have consequences. Leadership is measured by results, not titles or family names." My heart raced. Everything we had planned was working perfectly. I stood and walked to the center of the room, projecting calm authority. "With all due respect, Ethan, your recent decisions have led to missed revenue, lost clients, and staff dissatisfaction. This is verifiable and documented. The company cannot afford to operate under this pattern if we are to achieve growth and secure investor confidence." The board was silent, waiting. Ethan's posture stiffened. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the predator was not outside, but inside the room with him. Whitmore smiled faintly. "I believe with proper management, this company will flourish. The question is, are you prepared to allow that?" Ethan's jaw tightened. Sweat formed on his forehead. He understood now he had been outmaneuvered by the very person he had fired, mocked, and humiliated. The power shift by lunchtime. The board had made a decision. They couldn't ignore the facts, the data, or the investors' conditions. A temporary restructuring was implemented. Ethan's authority would be limited. Oversight committees were formed, and key projects would be directly monitored by independent advisors. A thinly veiled reference to me. The CEO, Richard Harrington, remained unaware of the full orchestration. To him it seemed like a professional, logical restructuring. To Ethan, it felt like a total collapse. By mid-afternoon I received a message from Whitmore. "The $800 million investment is secured. Congratulations." "He has no idea. It's your work that made it happen." I smiled. This was beyond personal revenge. This was proof that competence beats entitlement. Every single time. The final confrontation later that evening. I walked past Ethan Harrington in the hallway. He was alone, checking his phone, likely realizing the day's damage. I stopped. "Collected. Enjoying your new role as spectator?" I asked quietly. He froze. His face twisted with anger and embarrassment. "What are you doing here? You're fired. You have no right." I cut him off. "I may be fired on paper, but you're learning an important lesson. Titles mean nothing if you can't execute. Power is meaningless if it's unearned. And arrogance. Arrogance will get you fired faster than any CEO ever could." His eyes widened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I smiled, turned, and walked away. My phone buzzed, a confirmation from Whitmore. The funds had transferred to the company account. $800 million, secured, and the company's future safeguarded. Ethan Harrington slumped against the wall. Humiliated, defeated, powerless. Epilogue. Power redefined by the following week. The company was buzzing with energy. Staff morale had risen. New projects were greenlit, and Whitmore was personally overseeing execution. As for me, I remained behind the scenes. My role officially consultant, but my impact undeniable. I didn't need recognition. The satisfaction was enough. The arrogant CEO's son had learned that entitlement doesn't trump skill, and that even the smallest spark like a spilled cup of coffee can ignite a revolution. From that day forward, I walked with confidence. Manhattan skyscrapers, glass walls, polished floors, they no longer intimidated me. I had proven that intelligence, strategy, and patience could move mountains, outmaneuver the entitled, and secure victory in the most dramatic, satisfying way possible. When somewhere in the office, Ethan Harrington learned the harshest lesson. Never underestimate the person you fire.